Hello, friends. My name is Tim Lotman, and I'm here to talk to you a little bit about Hyflex and how it is practiced and understanding its application. Um, I've been working in higher education for about 25 years now, and what my primary goal at collegiate education is really kind of in the online world, right? So, not only is it putting classes online, creating and designing very functional and engaging online coursework, but also trying to understand Hyflex and understanding how it works the best with the most efficacy for student outcomes. So today we'll take a look at some of the fundamentals of Hyflex itself, the foundational definitions and understandings, and what you need to make sure everything works well. And then I'll tell you about a case study we had at Concordia, Texas, where they chose to use a Hyflex model, and then kind of the results that we saw from that experiment. So obviously, COVID-19 has really pushed the envelope in terms of what people are willing to do and try while they're online and trying to figure out how to escape online instruction or classroom face-to-face interruption of instruction. So let's kind of get started. So Hyflex is needed for higher ed, and I think that if this was 18 months ago, I was giving this presentation, I might have gotten some funny looks. Maybe some people were heckle me a little bit, but now that we are squarely, experiencing the pandemic, we have a new appreciation for what Hyflex can do, right? So over the past several years, more institutions have been moving toward at least some of their learning online, right? Traditionally, this new modality takes the shape of a traditional online course, asynchronous and static delivery. So, think back like 15 years ago when online learning was just emerging, right? You'd have some content that was put, if you were lucky, in a learning management system, right? And then you'd have students engaging in what we would consider traditionally online courseworks, right? So discussions, auto-graded quizzes, and probably some sort of formative assessment in terms of an artifact that they would be created by the student. So this is kind of like the small emergences that have been happening 15, 16 years ago. And then, of course, it's evolved into what we learn today, which is funny because if I were to say traditional online course 15, 16 years ago, people will say, that's an oxymoron. There's not the same thing. But when I say traditional online course today, we have a pretty good idea of what it means. During the pandemic, many schools suspended in-person classes and attempted to put as much learning as they could online. This posed some challenges. Students found some aspects of remote learning positive. Many students will be expecting to keep some of those benefits, right? So you probably had pre-pandemic a couple of different camps, right? Some people who were like, you know what, we'll never do online learning because face-to-face is where it's at, right? And then you have some people who are saying, you know what, actually, it's not as necessary as I once thought, but maybe we should try this new medium, this new modality of online learning, right? And then you have some people, who are in the hybrid camp, who are like, hybrid is the way to go. They kind of fall in between, right? And now all of a sudden, you have in the pandemic more people. If this was a spectrum, right, and over here was totally online, and this is totally face to face, we see people more comfortable kind of swinging toward the online side of the spectrum, and this for a couple different reasons, right? Because now we have lots and lots and lots and lots of data of how students can learn well online, right? So we have the wisdom of experience, right? And another reason is that believe it or not, there have been some advantages to online learning, right? I mean, think about the idea, even in a hybrid course or even in a face-to-face course where you have a common online gradebook, right? Things are documented, things are in place in an order. Students, they need to review something. It's all there in front of them. All of a sudden, people are starting to see advantages, all of which I mentioned, and not least of all, is the ability to flex time, specifically in an asynchronous class, right? So if I look at my, it used to be if I missed my Tuesday class, I was out of luck. I had to call the instructor, all these kinds of things. Now all of a sudden, it's like, okay, well, I have until midnight of Thursday night to get this in, right? So this idea to flex time, there's some benefits to this. There are obviously some drawbacks, and there's lots of papers written about some of the drawbacks of online education. But generally, we're kind of moving toward that end of the spectrum where we have this concept of, hey, there are some great advantages that are pretty undeniable, right? That you have in this modality. So Hyflex, being a mixed modality, allows learners to choose modality at any time, right? So this is new, right? So in the past, if you signed up for a psych class that was online, your psych class was online for all 16 weeks of the semester. If it was face to face or residential, it was residential all 16 weeks of the semester. And so, what this Hyflex is allowing people to do is to capriciously choose where they're going to take that, where they're going to consume that learning. Am I going to be in class for the first 3 days of class? Yeah. Am I going to maybe do my next 2 classes remote because something that I just have a preference for? Okay. Am I having a hard concept and I don't want to do this remotely, so I'm going to show up for the instructor to get extra intensive care? Yeah. So now I can choose capriciously on a whim in the same class because as an instructor, I'm designing all of my student outcomes to be identical regardless of the modality you choose. And now we have this other element that's flexing in there, right? So the example I just gave you was an example of remote versus face-to-face, right? But this third entity, this third element of synchronous versus asynchronous, so Hyflex courses now allow students, if built properly, they might say, I'm going to show up for this class face to face, the first 2 classes. The next class or 2, I'm going to take it synchronously remote by watching a Zoom session where my instructor and classmates are interacting. And maybe for the next, 10 weeks of the course, maybe for that, I'm just going to do the rest of it asynchronously. Oof, we've never had that kind of experience before. We've never allowed that kind of capriciousness for consumption of learning before. And we are starting to see students raise their hands and say, yeah, I want a little bit of that, please, in my coursework, right? The Chronicle of Higher Education put out a survey. It was about 800, 900 different faculty leaders, and administrators of colleges. And there was a question on there that said, do you expect that students are going to expect more technology advances, more technology offerings in terms of their online consumption than they have pre-pandemic? 92% said yes. So we know it's coming, right? Students probably didn't like everything that was happening when we did remote learning during the pandemic, but there are parts that they liked. There are parts that they liked, and they're going to want to say, hey, how come we can't do that more? What's really going to push the industry a little bit more toward that spectrum I'm telling you about is that some people, some institutions are just going to start offering that flat out. And students are going to start listening. The market will listen and say, hey, wait, I'm going to go over there and vote with my dollars, right? And then they're going to take that with them. So this is why that becomes very important. Understanding the ideal of choice and student preparedness, saying, you know what, I've experienced some of this stuff and I know exactly what I want to do. That is going to be harder to consume. Now, flashback 17 years or so, where we had higher education experiencing the infancy of online education, right? And we did have a lot of schools that said, online's not for us, and for a lot of good reasons, right? There were good reasons to resist it at that moment in time. But then we had a lot of for-profit colleges come in who were experts, right, in technology, and they saw a lot of enrollments because students voted with their dollars, right? They said, I really would like to take classes in a flex time format. Thank you very much. And I think we're going to see a little bit more of that in our industry as it slowly teeters more toward this online learning modality. A Hyflex course is built on 2 simultaneous learning paths combined together to give flexibility, choice to the student. The evolution of traditional online courses, the next evolution, right? So it's not a replacement, it's the next evolution. And the reason why this is a little tricky, right, is because regardless of what modality your learning is taking place, you still have to get everyone to the same learning outcomes at the end of a course. That makes sense, right? You wouldn't create an online psychology course and a residential psychology course that had 2 different learning outcomes if they were both Psych 101. You wouldn't do that. But now that you have online, residential, and synchronous slash asynchronous in there, the challenge of design becomes paramount, right? So, how do I design that where all of my student interactions, my student assessments, my student activities are all capturing everything necessary in order to shepherd all of those students, regardless of the modality, regardless of the synchronicity, to the desired outcomes of the course? Design is going to be a big deal, right? Now, fortunately, faculty are experts in their field, and they're experts in teaching and learning, right? But there's going to have to be some design know-how, some to kind of do some heavy lifting when designing these Hyflex courses, right? I always like to think of three buckets when I talk about Hyflex, right? Classroom technology. This is what I call the Radio Shack paradigm, right? If you're, born in the 70s like I was, Radio Shack was a big deal. You went there when you needed a piece of technology, right? So this encompasses all the stuff like microphones, cameras. Do I have a directional mic? Do I have two of them? So whoever's listening remotely or asynchronously can hear what the audience says without me repeating it. Do I have cameras where students can see me and the student body at large? Do I have a monitor in my room so I can see who's actually tuning with Zoom, right? This Radio Shack bucket is great because we've kind of mastered this, right? Technology marches on. Fortunately for other industries in the entertainment industry, we've got really good technology to leverage for these Hyflex courses. Number two, instructional design, right? This is going to become more and more important than it has been in the past. It used to be, I think, back in the day where somebody, a department chair, could say, hey, Professor Lotman, please make a course, an online course in speech and debate, argumentation 206 or whatever, play with me here. So you have this example, right? And the faculty was like, yeah, I can do this. With a little bit of know-how, they can kind of put the content in the right spots using the right appropriate activities. But now that we have multimodality, multi-synchronicity, there's going to be more of a demand and a need, quite frankly, for properly designed courses. Without that, right, you don't need it, of course. It's not essential. But without that, it puts more pressure on the teacher of that course, right? Imagine two courses that were created for Hyflex, right? One of them was done without the knowledge of how do I use conjoined activities in order to make sure that my students get to the same desired outcome using different kinds of activities. Instead of now me grading 3 buckets of assignments, we've designed it so these activities are designed in a way where everybody kind of gets to the same outcome, even though the activities are different. So instructional designers are going to be really kind of flexing their chops here a little bit, kind of saying, yeah, we actually we know what we're doing here. We can actually provide this for you. And then finally, faculty development, right? I think that in that same Chronicle of Higher Education survey that I quoted a little bit earlier, the vast majority of faculty understand that, more technology means more development, right? And development not only in trainings, but support, right? So we at my institution, right, at Collegiate Education, we obviously provide training for faculty. I mean, everybody does, but we also provide just-in-time support, right? Because when I'm preparing for a course, when do I need the most help, right? It's probably like, oh man, it's probably like an hour before my class and something's not going right and I have to actually have some help right now. That kind of faculty development and faculty support makes up the third bucket. And if you have all three of these buckets humming well, you're going to have a very successful Hyflex course. So who's using Hyflex today, right? Since it was developed at San Francisco State University, Hyflex model has been adopted at institutions around the world. Cambrian College in Ontario offers Hyflex courses for graduate programs in business analytics, crime analytics, community and health services navigation. The University of Michigan offers courses including statistics in the Hyflex format. Delgado Community College in New Orleans has been working on how to incorporate Hyflex into its curriculum. I was just on a webinar not that long ago with San Diego State University, and they're leveraging Hyflex. These kinds of colleges are seeing that students prefer this, and so they're kind of getting ahead of the game with their offerings. Now, at this point of the conversation, I think it's really important that I kind of pause, right? And because right now people are like, oh my gosh, I already spent all this money developing online courses, or I have 100 courses to redevelop, or whatever. The transition isn't going to go like that, right? If you think back to how the transition was online, it's kind of like if we were the manager of a car fleet, right? And we had 200 cars, and then we decided, hey, from now on, we're going to have electric cars, right? Now, I'm not going to like get rid of all 200 cars and buy 200 Teslas for my fleet. But as courses, cars in our analogy, start to come under revision needs, now that's the time when we start replacing those with Hyflex courses, right? So in the very beginning of this presentation, I talked about how this was the next evolution, right? So these are kinds of things that we think about in terms of figuring out what the appropriate Hyflex response should be. Who benefits from Hyflex? And I want to say everybody, but there's some specific individuals, some specific institutions that might benefit most from this, right? So schools who currently have no online courses and want to make the transition to Hyflex course while skipping the traditional online course format. Not many of those nowadays, not in 2021, where lots of people at least have tried some sort of online learning. Schools that have a defined number of courses to offer in a sequence, like a master's program or cert. And then schools who also have an even population of residential and online courses, right? So these are easier efforts to swing the needle one way or the other. At this point, I always love to talk about the advantages of Hyflex, right? So like we talked about earlier, the advantages of online, right? Hyflex specifically has 3 distinct advantages that are unique to this new evolution, right? It allows students to choose the modality they would like day by day, right? An unprecedented amount of student choice. Hyflex scheduling allows schools to schedule just one section of a course. So you have this now efficiency of scheduling. I no longer have to have one online section of psychology, one residential section of psychology. I can actually combine them. And now all of a sudden, it doesn't matter where the student is, because if they're in a different state or the different county or different city, they can still zoom in synchronously and join the rest of the class, or they can take it asynchronously. So now I have some efficiencies in registration. And finally, Hyflex allows schools to avoid instructional interruption. So as an interesting example that hits close to home, right? My children go to a school district that just declared the end of snow day, right? You probably remember snow days as a kid. It's a cherished memory, right? School is off, you go out and sled, play in the snow, whatever. But now, of course, all these rooms are Hyflex. These courses are all set up. And so now, even if there's a snow day, no need to stop instruction, no need to interrupt it. Because ultimately, we have to figure out, I don't want to be the bearer of bad news, but there's a chance that this isn't going to be the only pandemic. Or in the case of climate change, that environment situations get worse, right? More big storms, things like that. We need to kind of figure out, what do we do in a situation where instruction could be interrupted? And this provides that, right? At an instant, we could, if we ran a Hyflex course, say, hey, by the way, tomorrow's course, we're going to flex because there's a big, hurricane coming in and we're just going to stay home. Presumably that you still have internet and electricity, obviously. But the freedom from those unpredicted environmental challenges is a great advantage of Hyflex. How a Hyflex course is created. Remember those 3 buckets? So those all come into play, right? Technology. Where's my technology at my classroom? Looking around, do I have enough to support those people who are not in the classroom? And then also, how's my classroom designed? How am I shepherding all those students to the desired outcomes of the course? And then finally, are my faculty supported? Are the people who are actually in charge of education, are they supported? And if you answer yes to all those 3 questions, that's how your class is designed well. So one partner that we work with pretty regularly is Concordia University in Texas, right? And obviously, one of the ways that they decided to battle the interruption of coursework was to do a Hyflex course, right? And so we worked with them to make sure that those 3 buckets were full, right? So they had technology outfitted in a handful of classrooms. I think it was actually 3. And then they had faculty who were trained on the technology and how to kind of shepherd students from all modalities into the same direction. And then also we took a look at designing the course, because they're consistently designing the coursework. And so how do we design those to be proof from those kinds of interruptions, right? Because if you have a situation like COVID-19 that forces you to, say, call off the rest of the school year after spring break, right? That's significant, right? And students are not happy. Parents are not happy. And so figuring out how to keep that instruction going helped Concordia make it through. And of course, they now have it. They are now ready for when that happens. And so I'll be delivering this conversation, this same speech, live when we're in Washington, D.C. In October for OLC. And my partner from Concordia, Texas will be with us, and she'll zoom in and tell us a little bit about what worked. The thing is that, believe it or not, the students make the transition fairly easily, right? For students who are integrated and plugged in, they have a lot going for them in terms of adaptability to technology, adaptability to flexing of time. And so they experienced a great amount of success, to kind of avoid having those interruptions. And by doing so, they had happier students. So to kind of review, we have Hyflex, which has the 3 buckets of technology, design, and training. And then we have the advantages of Hyflex, not least of which is to avoid the interruption of technology, or interruption of teaching. And by doing that, you can kind of review. So when I take a look at where our industry will be going as it swings slowly but surely to the other end of the spectrum, I see that Hyflex is in all of our futures, quite possibly in the near future. So if you want to catch me in Washington, D.C., we'll be doing the same conversation with a live audience, as well as my partner will be with us from Concordia. Great time to ask some Q&A. Love to see you all there. And if you have any, I believe you can drop some questions here in our format as well. So enjoy the day. Think about Hyflex and the coming of the new technology. Bye, my friends.